This video is going to focus solely on the limited agency consent agreement, and its use and its requirements. Now, this is used at any time when you are going to be representing seller and buyer. What most frequently happens is you already have a seller under ERS and a buyer who is now interested in purchasing that home. It may be a buyer you're already working with, and this listing happens to you say, "Hey, I've got a listing that might work," and it does. Or a buyer comes in to an open house that's not represented and asks you to represent them to help buy the property in any format that you end up now representing both sides. That's one form. And that's for an individual agent representing themselves and being a limited agent. The other form is the next level higher, and that's where a listing agent is a listing agent that is affiliated with Prime Real Estate Experts, and the buyer's agent is affiliated with Prime Real Estate Experts. That limited agency still exists because remember, each of those contracts, the listing agreement and the REPC, really are held at the brokerage level. So the brokerage is now at a limited agency, particularly if these two agents know each other and are familiar with each other in the brokerage and have a lot of interaction together. And so there are some legal requirements that are basically the minimum standards of performance that we emphasize to our clients that we do everything we can to exceed minimum requirements because we're doing everything we can to protect each of their interests within a unique legal framework. So there are some terms that are defined that they need to understand, and that's the idea of what a principal or branch broker is. That every brokerage has to have a principal broker. If they're in a branch, there's a branch broker. Now, in our situation, in our office, we currently have 3 brokers. We have Marty, who is the principal broker, who's responsible for the entire brokerage. Myself, I am a branch broker. There is actually a Prime Real Estate Experts Founders branch, and that exists for some legal reasons, but allows me to help manage. And then there's Craig, who is an associate broker. Craig, who is the owner. Now, we know from the way that things are set up, Craig will get involved in helping with agents, particularly with a lot of commercial and development. But if it's residential, then you're going to be working primarily with Marty and I at any time you're working at a brokerage level. Rights of the agents to represent seller and or buyer. This simply states that an agent, when they represent a buyer, they represent the buyer's interests and have obligations to the buyer. When they represent the seller, they represent the seller. Legally, they can, in fact, represent both. Some states do not allow this type of legal relationship at all, out of concerns for trying to maintain certain aspects of the transaction. And here's why. A seller's agent, it represents the seller and always has the seller's best interest in mind and has the obligations for loyalty, full disclosure, confidentiality, diligence, obedience, and reasonable care to that seller. As long as what they're asking to do in terms of loyalty is legal. If they're asking you to do something that violates legality or is dishonest or violates the terms of honesty towards the other side, then no, we can't do that. Of course, buyer's agent represents the buyer and has the buyer's best interest and the same fiduciary duties in terms of loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, diligence, obedience, and reasonable care, as long as what they're being asked to do fits within those. But also has a requirement of obligation for honesty toward the seller side. Well, this becomes difficult in a limited agency situation, can become difficult where it's a single agent representing both parties because they're now privy to all of the information of both parties, including information that could, in fact, weaken one of the two parties' bargaining situation. If the seller is willing to come down to a lower price, but the buyer's offering full price, you can't turn to the buyer and say, "Hey, by the way, my seller will take X amount," because that's not representing the seller's best interest. If the buyer's lowballing the offer but knows that they could go higher, and they could go higher, you can't turn to the seller and say, "Hey, by the way, I happen to know they're lowballing you. They're good for more," because that would weaken their buyer's position. They have to remain neutral in what they share. However, that confidentiality does not protect you from not disclosing if either of the parties in some way cannot perform. Buyer's not going to qualify for the loan. You can't keep dragging the seller out when you know the buyer may not qualify, isn't going to qualify. There's appraisal issue. There's some type of issue that makes it so the buyer can't perform, and they keep telling you, well, just extend, just extend. We'll see what we can do. We can do. And you have to be honest with the seller and say, buyer's in a situation they can't perform. It doesn't, then it's up to the sellers on how they choose to respond. However, you're in the middle of that, and case law and state and as well as statutory law have now established that you have to remain neutral, and that can be very difficult to do when you've got two parties with very competing end goals on the transaction. Now, the other aspect of this that then comes in is your seller negotiated. If your seller negotiated, they pay a set amount for the brokerage fee as a seller, and then for the buyer. Now, what are you going to collect? You represent both sides, and your seller may be looking at you going, "Well, wait a minute. now I'm paying you for both instead of for one." They need to recognize that they're paying you as the seller, but you're also representing a buyer and have to do all the work for the buyer. And the seller, if they turn to you and say, "But I want to renegotiate terms of the contract," it's negotiable. And so you need to be aware that that could occur. Now, that's if you're representing both sides. And that's where you would come down here, number 9, authorization for limited agency, and be marking that you, as the one agent, the buyer and the seller both have to consent to you representing both of them. Limited agency on an in-house sale. This is now where you have an agent and an agent, listing agent and prime real estate experts, buyer agent, prime real estate experts. They now have a deal going together. Conflicts within an in-house sale could be that these two have a working relationship and may want to get they want to do right by their co-agent, or it can be very easy for them to come together and have conversations where they may incidentally disclose confidential information or information that could weaken their position. In order to protect against that, the advantage of having 2 brokers always available, and Craig a third available in situations where he's the one with the most expertise, is if you represent seller and another agent represents buyer, we assign each of you to work with only one of the 2 brokers. So if you represent seller and you've got a good relationship with Marty, and Marty knows everything's going on the sales side and hasn't had any conversation with the buyer agent about it, then you're going to stay working with Marty. Buyer's agent is going to work with me, and the buyer's agent can ask me any questions they'd be asking for a broker. And then if you two need to meet about it, then Marty and I will be there as well to help make sure that you're protected in the way that you interact with each other. Now, this may seem a bit over the top, but it's to protect you. If there's ever any disagreement over what kind of communication went on, both of us are going to stand there and say, as witnesses, we can tell you what occurred. This is what we recommended, what they recommended each one do, and what they follow through on. This is to protect you. And it also, then we put in place that while we may have talked about this listing in brokerage meeting or whatever before, it's no longer public conversation, because that could compromise information from both sides. We're not going to walk around and say, "Hey, by the way, did you happen to know that agent over here also has a buyer who could offer more?" That could put our buyer in a bad position. So we do everything we can to protect the confidentiality and provide a little bit of a firewall there, protection for you if there's ever any disagreements or concerns about what may have occurred. Now, this may sound a bit over the top. Marty and I have been in these situations before where where it was just the 2 of us at the time, and I represented buyer and he represented seller, and it got ugly a bit during the course of the transaction, because some choices made by the seller, and my buyer was having anxiety. Seller was dragging feet. Marty was kind of stuck in the middle. And when I wanted somebody to go to and ask for advice, I couldn't really ask him for advice because he represented the other side. And so we would have a third party stand there. And if I walked in to ask him questions, I would say, "Marty, I am coming to you as the agent representing so-and-so." And he would say, "Okay, I'm now answering as the agent so-and-so." And our third party would watch it. It was like watching 2 people become very stiff And we became very formal in the way we interacted because we were trying to do everything we could to protect our agents or our clients' confidentiality and their situation. We want to be able to say to anyone in an in-house sale like that, we have set up that each of the agents will work with a specific broker and will work with them through the course of this transaction so that they've got the help, but maintain the confidentiality, maintaining our loyalty to you, and being able to do everything we can to do right by each party. Earnest money deposit. We're still going to go for the principal broker here. Obviously, they're going to recommend that the earnest money be held at the brokerage, not the title company. And if there's ever a disagreement over it, then it will ultimately be the principal broker that has to work through that, and that would be Marty. Now, both parties have to agree to this, whether it's single agent or in-house. So you have to mark which it fits, and then buyer, seller, signature of authorized agent or broker. So get it signed by the broker that everything is okay. And then, like I said, we'll set up that relationship. We'll immediately set up who you're going to work with and set up that firewall for you. As always, if you have any questions about limited agency, talk to me. If you have questions about how it operates, talk to me. If it's about a specific transaction, then let's talk about if you're going to ask me about the transaction or talk to Marty about the transaction, who we're going to set up as your go-to contact during the course of that transaction.